Hello everyone, Torvald here with another story from the good old days. Now I was reminded of this series. This is actually going to be kind of long, and it's actually a series of a couple of stories. But I was reminded of this because I saw a post from a very old friend of mine from the West Kingdom and the Principality of Cynaguan, Zaid al-Falah al-Hajid. I hope I pronounced that right. He and I had some really epic and fun battles that took place over a series of about 4 years at Cynaguan Coronet. Because the list was usually long enough that they would divide the list field into quarters. And then they would divide up the number of people fighting into those fields. And you would fight in those fields until enough people were eliminated that they could condense them. Because my name started with a T and his started with a Z, we always ended up in the same field. And we ended up facing each other repeatedly somewhere around 4th or 5th round. Both of us were good enough that we would advance usually to that point. And the most hilarious thing about this was that the fights in many ways were just a replay of the previous fight. Now, I don't mean that in that the same person always won and that we always did the same exact thing, but there were kind of stages that happened in each and every fight that repeated themselves. So what would end up happening is we would end up facing each other 4th or 5th round. They would call the Leon, we would start, and we would mix it up, fight, and then one of us would get the other guy's leg. So one of us would go down. And again, it wasn't always me and it wasn't always him. It was just one of us would get a leg. All right, fine. So that person goes down. And then we would fight. And then the guy that was legged would almost always get the standing guy's arm. For those of you that aren't familiar with SCA combat, typically if you lose your leg, you go down to your knees and fight from there. That simulates lack of mobility because you've got a leg wound, and it gives your opponent an advantage. So the guy on his leg would typically get the arm, the weapon arm, of the standing person. And then that person has to switch into their offhand and then fight, and then one of us would lose. And again, it wasn't always the same person, but it kind of went through these stages repeatedly. Somebody gets a leg, somebody gets an arm, and then somebody wins. The very next Coronet, we face each other again. Somebody gets a leg, somebody gets an arm, somebody loses. And it got to the point where we realized that we were going to lose our arm to each other more often than we did with other people. There was just something about the way that our styles clashed that made it happen, the way that we fought. And so we started practicing a little more at our various fighter practices with our left arm. This was back before I had a lot of arthritis issues that essentially almost made it impossible for me to use my left arm in that way. So this kind of reminded me of all of that and a situation that came up at a particular spring coronet. So that's the story I'm going to tell you now, is the story of that spring coronet. Most of this focuses on me initially, but you'll see why I was talking about Zaid when we get towards the end here. Everybody at some time in their life, at least I hope everybody at some time in their life, has an absolutely epic day or couple of days. And this weekend, this particular coronet is one that I always consider to be one of my finest moments. And so I want to get this recorded down and share it all with you. So this was Spring Coronet, and Spring Coronet in Cynaguan was always held on Memorial Day weekend, which was a 3-day weekend. So the lists for the Coronet were not held until Sunday, not on Saturday. So instead, Saturday was filled up with some fighting going on, usually prize tournaments or challenge tournaments or whatever else. And then there were also arts and sciences competitions. And one thing in particular was the Bard of Cynaguan competition. Now at this particular time, I am the Bard of Cynaguan. And part of my duty is to run the competition to choose my successor. So Saturday, I didn't plan to fight at all for two reasons. Number one, I was busy. Aside from the fact that I was running the Bard of Cynaguan competition, and I was setting up the location where we were going to do it, getting the judges' sheets ready, lining up the judges, and explaining the scoring system to them if they didn't already know it, and getting that ready, I was just kind of relaxing for the most part. One of the big things about me physically was, even back then, before I started having all the arthritis issues, I very rarely was ever able to fight 2 days in a row in the SCA. There were times that I would practice 2 to 3 times a week, although I found out rather quickly that 3 times was too many for me. But I generally practiced twice a week. There was always days in between to recover. So I had no plans to fight on Saturday. I was just going to fight on Sunday during the Coronet. But as I'm sitting in my camp, the Princess of Cynaguan, who was Issa at the time, Connor and Issa were the Prince and Princess of Cynaguan. Issa comes into camp, and of course I immediately get up and bow and ask her if I can help her. And she says, actually, yeah, could you please fight in the Great Weapons tourney today? And that was my initial reaction, just kind of, because the princess is asking me to fight in the tournament, but I don't want to fight on Saturday. I want to wait until Sunday. And I start to defer that way. Well, Your Highness, I plan to fight in the lists tomorrow, and I typically can't fight 2 days in a row. And then she turned on the sad puppy eyes at me. Please, Torvald, it's a memorial tourney for a friend of mine that was a great weapons guy, has passed away. And turn off the sad puppy eyes, Your Highness. Yes, I will fight. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, at this point, I had been fighting in the SCA. Well, I joined in 1981, so 91, so 19 years, 18 years. And this was probably not the earliest stages of my arthritis issues, but for several years I had had problems with my knees. But she had been around long enough, her and Connor both, that they remembered that I was kind of a great weapons specialist. When I first started in the SCA, I fought my first years with great axe. About the only way that I would pick up a shield was when my knight would threaten my life if I didn't use one from time to time. I mean, I started with one to learn the basics of SCA combat, but I really loved great axes, and to this day I still really love great axes. I rarely fought with them in tournament anymore because most of the people in tournaments fought with sword and shield, and fighting someone with a shield with a great weapon requires a lot of movement. There are ways you can fight up close with somebody with a shield with a great weapon, but it still requires a lot of movement. And since my knees didn't work the way I wanted them to anymore, typically I only brought a great weapon out if somebody else did. So I go out to fight in the Great Weapons tourney. I honestly, to this day, do not remember who the first person I fought in that tournament was. It was a knight, but I cannot recall which knight it was. So we fight first round with great axes. My favorite weapon of choice for great weapons. That fight lasted about 3 blows, and all of them were mine. I literally kind of ran the guy over, and that is not meant as an insult to this knight, but honestly, at the same time, I cannot remember who it was. It was just such a short fight, and I won. So second round now, I'm fighting Earl Cubby de Elmhurst, another good friend of mine. Cubby was an earl and a knight. That meant he had been king at least once to be an earl. He had been Prince of Cynaguan multiple times, so we're not talking a slouch here as far as fighting goes. But he and I knew each other from back when I fought almost exclusively great weapons. And so we go out with great swords, and we mix it up. We have a really, really good fight. We have a couple of really good exchanges, and then he did something silly. He tried some weird, funky spin-out maneuver like this, and as he did that, I came up around it over like this. Cubby fought with a breast and back plate combination, and I caught him right underneath the front edge of his breastplate and just on his knight's belt, nothing else. Oof! He lets out this explosive oof, bends over, drops down on his knees, and I'm thinking I really hurt him. I drop my sword, I get down next to him. Are you okay? And he goes, no! Gasps a couple of times and says, God, I'm glad I got stomach muscles. And I'm like, are you going to need some help or anything? He's like, no, I'm all right now. He says, what possessed you to try that? And he says, I don't know, but it was stupid. So, third round now, I pull Duke Garrick von Kupke. And Garrett comes out with a glaive, so I borrow a glaive from a friend of mine, and we go at it with glaives. And again, we have a really nice, solid fight, a whole series of exchanges and maneuvering and what have you. Now, the thing is, Garrick fights mostly sword and board, and he has a pretty unique style when he does that. And one thing that he does incorporate is a spin-out maneuver, something like Cubby had just tried to do. And honestly, though, he's actually pretty decent with it. He knows how to time it and where to place it in a fight. And it doesn't necessarily always work, but he does get it to be successful from time to time. If nothing else, it usually throws off his opponent a little bit to let him follow up with something else. Well, he tries that with a glaive, and I didn't buy it at all. I just hooked over this way and swung like this at his back as he was spinning. And Garrick also fought with a breast and back plate combination. And his arms, when he made that spin out, had raised up, and his chest and back plate rode up. And as I'm backstroking, I'm seeing nothing but bare area where his kidneys are. And I'm just pulling the blow for all I'm worth. Pull, 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 pull. And I just barely dink him on the back, right over his kidneys. And he stops, stands straight up, turns around and looks at me and he says, you pulled that, didn't you? And I went, yeah, you all right? And he says, yes, thank you. Boom, and dives to the ground. He's on the ground, he's dead. So now I'm moving on into fourth round, and I'm undefeated with great weapon. And I started to notice something that was really kind of amusing. There were two groups of knights standing over on the side of the field. Now, some of them had been fighting in this tournament. Some of them had wandered over. And they were separated. And on the right-hand side was a bunch of what I would call the older knights. These are guys that I had started off with in the SCA. Some of them predated me in the SCA. And most of them had been knights for like 12, 15 years at that point. And then off to the left, there's another group of knights that I referred to as the young knights, because these guys had only been in the SCA maybe 8 years, 5 years, and were athletic enough and devoted enough that they had become knights pretty quickly. And the old knights are all standing over there grinning from ear to ear as they're watching me, and all the younger knights are standing there with various expressions of, because most of them had never or very rarely seen me fight with great weapons. Some of these guys I never saw except at tournaments, whether it was in the Coronet tournament or the Crown tournament. They very rarely ever saw me fighting with a great weapon, one-on-one singles. They'd see me running around with them at war, but war is a very different situation with great weapon as opposed to one-on-one singles fights. So they were just kind of puzzled and shocked by this. So I end up going all the way to semifinals. And at that point, I was still clean. Now, there were 3 of us in semifinals. And so they set up a round-robin semi-final. Each of us had to fight the other guy one time, and then the two best would advance to finals. And there was myself, Colin McClear, who was not knighted at this point. He got knighted shortly after this, maybe 6 months to a year later, I think. And Duke Fabien d'Armay. So my first fight is with Colin. Now, there are a few things you need to know about Colin. Colin was relatively new to what we call the Central Kingdom of the West. The West Kingdom includes Northern California, most of Nevada, Alaska, Guam, Japan, and at that time, Australia, basically most of the Pacific Basin. And he had lived in Alaska almost all his life, and had only recently moved down. And he fought almost exclusively with bastard sword. He was a bastard sword specialist the way that I was a specialist with great axe. Except that I decided to go ahead and fight in bastard sword, because I wasn't exactly bad with it, it just was not the weapon that I favored the most. But I made a tactical error at that point, because he asked me to fight him across the barrier, 8 counted blows within the quarters. And yes, I know I'm going to have to explain that. The barrier is basically a fence that's just about waist high. And you have to fight each other across that barrier. And the barrier is only maybe 4 feet wide. It's not very long. Within the quarters means that arm and leg blows don't count, only body and head. 8 counted blows means whichever one of us gets 8 counted shots against the other person wins. I don't like fighting barrier, because when I'm fighting great weapons, so much of what I do, even with my bad knees, involves movement. Maneuvering around, even if it's only subtle, by a step or so in either direction, forward, back, whatever. I change angles and I defend myself with that movement. So fighting across the barrier restricts me so badly that it put me at a major disadvantage. Additionally, I'm fighting at a disadvantage against a bastard sword specialist. To how special? We did call him a Jedi Knight. Okay? He picks up a bastard sword and you hear the sound effects of a lightsaber going off. Scary thing is, he ended up getting a squire after I had moved out of Kingdom, and he swore up and down his squire was better at bastard sword than he was. So, at any rate, we go at it, and I end up losing 8-3, I think it is. He got his 8, and I only got 3 on him. So now I go to fight Fabien. Fabien is using greatsword, so I grab my greatsword, and we go at it, and oh my lord, what a fight. This was a knockdown, drag out, beat each other to hell fight. And I don't necessarily mean beat each other to hell by how many times we slammed each other with the weapons. It was just so physical and so draining, with so much maneuvering, so many cuts and blocks, and we double killed twice. A double kill means we each got a killing blow on each other at the same time, and we have to start the fight over again. We double killed twice, and then on the third fight, he got me, and I missed getting the double kill on him by about 2 inches. I got him down on the thigh instead of getting him up on the hip, or it would have counted as a death. So I went out at the semifinals, and honestly, I don't recall which one of them won. I'm sure that Colin or Fabien, if they see this video, they'll be able to remember who did, but I don't recall who won. So as I'm coming off the field, I've got my helmet off and I've draped it over my greatsword and I got it on my shoulder, and as I'm heading off, I get mobbed by those groups of knights that were watching, mostly the younger ones, and they're all going, "Why don't you fight with great weapon more often? This is awesome, you did terrific." And I'm like, guys, the only reason I don't fight with great weapon more often in tournament is I don't fight with great weapon against shield. I prefer great weapon to great weapon. don't have the knees anymore for all the running around I have to do against someone who's got a shield. I won't exactly say me and my big mouth, but what that did lead to was the next couple of years, every Crown tournament I went to, my opponents would run out onto the field with a great weapon to make sure that I came out with a great weapon, and I had a ball. It was an absolute blast. So, that was Saturday. Sunday, it's time for the tournament. And I get up in the morning, and I hurt like hell. I really do. I know that I've pulled a couple of muscles in my abdomen. I've pulled a muscle in my thigh. My right arm hurts really badly down here towards the end of my bicep and my elbow. My shoulder hurts. But I'm not going to stay out. I mean, my consort is there. She's expecting me to fight. My consort was Lady Anastasia Grinstead of Ravenoak, the head of my household. I was her personal champion, and I was the household champion, so I was not going to stay out of the tournament. So I get armed up. I do a lot of stretching to try and make sure I don't pull anything extra, that I don't damage the ones that are already pulled much. And I go out. Now, the way that they handle the beginning of the tournament out west where I started is a little different than what some of the other kingdoms do, so let me explain. They have all the knights line up on the right-hand side of the prince. So if you're facing the thrones, they're on the left, and they have all the non-knights, we call them unbelts because they don't have a white belt on. So all the non-knights, the unbelts, are standing on the right. And that usually means there's a huge imbalance between the numbers. There's almost always a lot more unbelts than there are knights. And so the prince and princess, after they've gotten a list of all the people that have signed up to fight in the tournament, they'll pick specific individuals on the unbelted side to ask them to step over to the chivalry, to the knights side. And this is considered a great honor because, number one, some of their criteria is who do we think is getting close to that threshold that they should be taken more seriously towards becoming a knight, and or also someone they want to personally honor by asking them to step over. And for the first time ever, I got asked to step over to the chivalry side. I had never been asked before that, and I've never been asked since. So I felt very honored by that. I also performed in court a piece because as the Bard of Cynaguan, that was my duty to perform something for Coronet. So I did that. And it's a song that I call Issa's song, and it's also known as Cynagua's Rose. I believe it's up on my YouTube channel under SCA Songs or under Viking Home Companion. I'll have to go check and see if it's there. If it's not, I'm going to have to get it recorded and get it up. But, so, I get challenged first round by a lady named Rodri. She's since changed her name, Aurora. She was the lady, companion consort of Duke Rolf the Relentless. So, and she's left-handed. So first round, we go at it, and I beat her, but it was hard because my right arm was just not cooperating well. My timing was off, my targeting was off, and this is not to say that she is not a good fight. Quite the opposite, actually. I was pulling on that 18, 19 years worth of experience and throwing things at her that I didn't think she would recognize to get her. And if you've ever watched a left-handed fighter versus a right-handed fighter, you're going to see that there is a lot of stuff that comes around to your open side. My shield is on this side. My weapon arm is over here, and she's just the opposite. So there's all sorts of stuff that comes around the open sides of our shields. And just as I got her, she managed to hit me in the right arm. And it was a weird shot because I think I had gotten her with something like this and she hit me right there. And my right arm was already kind of screwed up. I was grateful that I had gotten that shot, because otherwise I was going to be in real trouble switching to single hand. So I got hurt. Second round, I honestly don't recall who I pulled for second round. And I won my second round fight. Oh no, excuse me, I lost my second round fight. I won my first round, I lost my second round. Third round though, I'm up against a really old friend of mine, Bjorn Bjarsafar of Bearhaven, who is now Sir Bjorn. But at third round, as I'm getting ready for it, I realize my right arm is literally dead. It's not working. I have no strength in my hand to even pick up my sword. The fingers don't want to grab and hold on to it. But I'm not going to pull out. I mean, this is a point of honor. I'm not going to just pull out of the tournament at this point. So I go out left-handed with my sword and doing single sword, no shield. Because, believe me, if I can't handle my sword on my right arm, there's no way I'm handling a shield on my right arm. So I go out left-handed with my single sword, and as I walk out there, Bjorn looks at me and he gets this big grin on his face and he goes, "Oh yeah, single sword, good Norse style of fight!" And he takes his shield and he tosses it off to the side, and we start to go, and they call the lay on, we go at it, and I actually didn't do too badly. Remember, I've got kind of some experience fighting left-handed here because of Zaid, right? I'm just wasted. So we go at it, he gets me, I fall over, and as I'm laying there, he looks down at me and he goes, "Wait a minute." You know, the herald and the marshal are stepping in to say, "Oh, hey, are you two satisfied with the fight?" And I'm saying yes, but Bjorn goes, "Wait a minute, were you fighting in your left hand?" And I said, "Yeah, my right arm is completely shot, and I didn't want to pull out, so I switched over to my offhand." And he goes, No, I'm not accepting this fight. No, I didn't realize you were in your left hand. No, get back up, we'll do it again. And he switched to his left hand, and I'm thinking to myself, no, I don't want to. Bjorn, I'm dead, I'm wasted, stick a fork in me, just let me go sit down. But, you know, he was very insistent, so I get up, and he switches to his offhand, and I don't know where I pulled it from, but I gave him as good a fight as I did before, and he managed to get me just as I legged him. So I'm over, I'm done. After 2 deaths, it's double elimination tournament. You lose twice, you're out. So now I'm done. So I'm heading over to the side of the field where my chair is and my household is. Anastasia's just beside herself because she was there when I fought all day yesterday, and she saw and knew what I was going through to fight that day. And I'm walking over, I've got my arms down at my side, I've let go of my sword, I've got a lanyard around my wrist, and it's just dragging along the ground. I can't even keep my head up. I just get over to there where my chair is, and I drop down on my knees in front of my chair, and I plant my head in the seat of my chair, and my household just converge on me and strip me out of my armor and get me turned around and sat in the chair. And now we're watching the tournament progress. I told you there was going to be a tie-in to Zaid, so here comes the tie-in. They get to finals, and the finals are Zaid al-Falah al-Haji against Eric von Rusbeck. So, finals is best 2 out of 3. And quite honestly, I can't remember the exact mix of who won which fight, but the one fight that made the determining distance, they each won one, and then we get to the last fight. So they mix it up, and Eric legs Zaid. Zaid goes down to his knees. They mix it up again. Eric steps in, mixes it up, gets Zaid's right arm, his weapon arm. Steps back, Zaid takes off his shield, tosses it over to the side, takes his sword, sticks it in his left hand, and I looked over at my household and I said, Zaid just won. And they all look at me like, what? Eric, to be chivalrous, took off his shield and tossed it aside. Now, he stayed on his feet, he kept his sword, but he threw away his shield. And I said, wait, just watch. Eric just lost. And sure enough, Eric steps in, takes a swing, Zaid counters and backhands him right across the side of the head. Twank, whack, and just Eric goes over. And Zaid and Louise, his wife, become the Lord and Lady of the Swan. And they follow Connor and Issa to the thrones of Cynaguan. So all of this, again, I got reminded of by seeing a posting from Zaid on Facebook, and it reminded me of that weekend. In particular, the fights he and I had, which is why I knew, once he ended up in his offhand, if Eric was not used to fighting Zaid, when Zaid was in his offhand, that, no, Zaid had that one. Because he and I had done it so many times that he was able to get him. So, Zaid, been a long, long time. I hope this brought up a happy memory for you, because I believe that was your first time, you and Louise, on the thrones of Cynaguan. So, that's another story from the good old days.